Good morning, and let's welcome you to our Abuja studio. Charles, thank you for the good job you are doing from there. Now, it is not always that we go international, but this weekend in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, African heads of state and government are meeting in a very crucial meeting of the African Union, at which they will elect a new president, a new chairman of the AU. But what interests us this morning is the theme of this year's meeting. Africa, heads of state and government, will be looking at the issue of reparation. Reparation against the background of the emergence of a new president in the United States who is churning out so many policies that ought to engage African heads of state. Also, on the African continent at present, Sudan is unraveling. There is crisis in Ethiopia itself. DR Congo is in a mess. And here in West Africa, there are a number of trouble spots. So the question should be really, what ought to be engaging African heads of state and government? Is it reparation or trying to get Africa out of its current mess? Pardon my language. And I have with me our friend from the other part of West Africa, Emmanuel Akwete. Emmanuel Akwete is a Ghanaian political scientist and governance analyst. He is one of 13 board members of the Ghanaian Foreign Relations Ministry. Emmanuel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is a continental issue. Yes. African heads of state and government meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and they are looking at reparation. Reparation has been a contentious issue over a long time, so it's understandable. But against the background of what is confronting Africa, conflicts all over the place, don't you think that those conflicts ought to occupy their attention and interest?
I think it would. I am not sure if it automatically displaces the issue of reparation, which has been on the cards for a long time. It's some kind of compensation to be paid over decades of trading with Africa in a very harsh and exploitative way. Slave trade has its dimensions and so on. The question is, so far, they need to find out how the Western world, whether it's Europe or the US, and for that matter any other country that exploited Africans, took some as slaves and dealt with them in many ways and so on. Whether some money has to be paid as compensation, both to the victims and from where they were taken. And I think this is an issue that probably they found a new strategy where this makes it possible. Sometimes AU agendas are formulated over a long period of time. I am not sure if they formulated the agenda and prioritized reparation if they knew that is Trump coming to office. It could be that they had done some groundwork and the potential or the candidates, Democratic candidates, Kamala Harris and so on, would consider it. Okay. So since they lost elections, I don't know if the AU is in a position to say quickly, we are changing the agenda, especially if it's been confirmed, it's been said, then they have to go through certain processes. But even if it's not going to happen, I think it's a worthwhile issue for them to champion.
Emmanuel, reparation.
Yes.
Looking at how we have been exploited, Africa has been exploited over time.
Yes.
But even now, Western industrial interests Western minerals interests, Western economic interests seem to stoke, if not drive, conflicts in Africa. Let me give you two examples. DR Congo is in conflict, not necessarily because of the local politics and the Rwandan pretense, because since this conflict started and is now blossoming, Rwanda's earnings from minerals have gone up. In other words, some people are interested in sustaining their violence in order to profit from the minerals there. Let me give you an example with Nigeria. That's not going very far. Illegal mining of gold in Nigeria is stoking violence. Looking at reparation when the exploitation is still going on and creating crisis, don't you think we should also give it some attention?
You're right. What is within their control that they can deal with effectively would necessarily have to be prioritized. But we can also say that life is not run one at a time. We solve problems. Some could be lateral, okay? Some could be sequenced, and so on and so forth. The important thing is for the powers that be, or those going to meet our president, feel strongly they have institutions and they have the competencies required to negotiate or to embark on a serious dialogue with parties with whom they have relations and from whom they can demand reparation. And what is the diplomacy that has taken place? In setting this agenda, should we also understand that the UK, the US, and various other countries have all agreed this is the agenda we're going to discuss? Or is it an African thing? The reparation question has been there for a long time. And the question is, what conditions, how have conditions changed for a conversation that leads to its resolution? We don't know much. At this moment, I don't know what makes them put it even on the table. But on the other hand, one could say, well, usually AU meetings and agendas are set when a lot of groundwork has also been done, because AU meetings, heads of states make decisions. And it's a question of whether there is evidence that people now are ready to make a collective decision on this thing, which borders every African country, and so on. I don't have those details, but I think I see two conditions. Dialogue requires a counterpart. Otherwise, you'll be speaking to yourself and laughing with yourself. And somebody passing by says, hey, what's happening here? It's abnormal. Do you see? But if it's been agreed that this is the time to put this forward, and they have also done their groundwork to know that those countries that indulge in slavery are dealing with this issue as a matter of conscience, but also in response to demands from Africa, where they also have business interests, trade, and other things. That, then we would say that, yes, you can go ahead because it's been agreed, okay, or they think some pathway has been opened. Diplomacy deals with all this. To the extent that they haven't given us any of those preconditions. But we know that the conversation of reparation has gone on for a long time. But Trump wasn't in office. And Trump wasn't expected to win elections as of May or June last year. But the reality today is that Trump has been elected. He's the de facto president. And the jury as well, because it's the law. He went through the process. Is this his first agenda? Okay, that he would want to pursue. I am not sure. He doesn't look it. Two, is it Europe? If it's Western Europe, yes, slave trade was there as well, and then it extended to other parts of the world. So are we looking at a situation where, for instance, European governments say, yes, we now think we must discuss this? In that case, they can go forward to strategize. There is always an AU-EU summit. I think I've forgotten a bit whether it's every 2 years or 3 or something. So they must have reasons to put the agenda on the table,
Now,
which says that there is some interest, there is some indication,
somewhere to dialogue with.
to dialogue, and that the conditions are fairly good.
Now, I want to talk about regional integration, regional collaboration.
Yes.
Please correct me if I'm not right. Regional integration presupposes that you are interested in the welfare, the well-being, the relationship of a group, a region.
Now, and its people,
and
the
its
entire
people.
population.
Thank you very much.
There's a market.
Thank you.
There's a know-how.
They're great.
To do things. And so
now, can't Africa do intra-African dialogue? Now, let me say why I'm asking this question. I raised the matter of the conflicts within the African continent. Without looking for somebody outside to dialogue with, can't Africa talk to itself, with itself, to begin to address some of these conflicts?
It's possible, and I think Africa has been doing that. But we should also understand that some of the conflicts have colonial antecedents and deep roots. What powers, if they are to deal with what was the continent, it has gold. You know, predominantly they were doing slaves, that is the reparation thing, now that is stopped. But we're also a big market now, and so on and so forth. So when we lay out the factors, it could be the case that AU, African leaders demanding reparation, feel they have arrived at a point and they are on good grounds for such a policy or demand to go through. And that's the information that ought to be on the table. It's the heads of states that will make that decision. And usually ahead of the meeting, missions go around. There's a whole lot of preparation. And so that will depend on what information they've gathered. That the countries that had all along been uncooperative to deliver disturbing this job, this issue, have actually opened up to it. And it's the opportunity they want to see.
Let me leave the reparation matter, if you don't mind. Twice or thrice now, you've mentioned the coming of Trump. The coming of Trump has come along with policies that Africa is not used to. I tell you that because a number of African governments design their budgets every year to include aids from wealthier nations, which is a kind of government philanthropy to Africa. And Trump is changing the equation. He's withdrawn from some of United Nations organs and extend assistance to Africa. He's closed down USAID, which is United States organ for extending aid to Africa.
Yes.
What should Africa be doing in this circumstance?
Aid has been an instrument of foreign policy for a long time. And therefore, if you're going to give aid, it also presupposes that you have some interest in the recipient countries. Americans trade with us too. They need our support in international matters sometimes. In the UN, if you look at the Security Council. And there may be various others. America always has interest in our minerals. You know, that's why Congo, most of the rare things that, minerals that they are even now introducing to producing cell phones and whatever, are all there. Okay. They have technological advantage to know what is there than we ourselves do. And even if we want to know sometimes, we have to depend on them. So there is that possibility of exploitation simply because of lack of know-how or adequate knowledge to confront. It's also the question of dividing. We're divided. So if a country is very hungry okay, in a very poor situation, has no money, civil war beckons because somebody will get down and so on and so on, and they feel they can do deals separately. That too can take place. They can work with that person and so on. But I think when we're looking at it in a bigger global context, for me, what I would look at is, are the 53 or 54 leaders, if all of them are gathering, has this agenda been well studied? Does it affect all countries? If it does, have they done the groundwork? Have they been able to build a consensus? Have they looked at the question of sharing whatever comes? Because we are not the same size of countries and economies with histories and all that. It's a good subject to pursue. However, I don't know the state of preparation, and I haven't been involved in the AU, the preparation towards this conference, and what made it an important item on the agenda. I do not know. But it is not a subject that can be wished away or dismissed. It's our preparation. If indeed we have leaders, that's why I'm saying that when they were planning this conference, it's clear that Kamala Harris was, until defeated, would have been in power by this time. That's if she had won, the Democrats, isn't it? And so maybe that deal with the Democrats and the negotiations were going fine. It could be that it was going fine also with the American technocrats, the trade officials, and so on. But it could have been a trade-off for something else. It's not simply a question of, we are doing it out of love or because of our sin. There could have been other interests they have for which this could be opening the way. So usually there is a whole lot that needs to be understood why this particular thing can be on top of an agenda. What are the vested interests? What are the converging and the divergent interests? You ought to know this. And so the question is, have our leaders, whether it's the foreign ministers, economics, trade, whatever they are, have they made us understand what is it they are going to discuss there? And have they asked for input as well? Given that every African country has scholars and experts and people who've worked in international organizations and have even dealt with some of these problems. I think the public deserves to have more information and analysis from the institutions of the state or those people who are involved in these things. They ought to know more. We ought to be informed and told a little bit more. In that case, we can back our negotiators, because our markets are also markets for American goods, for German goods, for British goods, and so on. So what I'm calling for is that the issue of reparation and the US and other countries that indulged, in that heinous trade, we ought to be given more information. What makes it possible to pursue it now than it was 30 years ago? We don't know. So the onus of the responsibility lies with our negotiators and our governments. What condition has improved, which makes this a number one item? Or is it just, let's try and see, just in case we have a good friend? Well, Trump has decided to dissolve or stop what USA does. I know that Ghana, my country where I come from, is about 1 million and is it 20 or 30 something? That is missing 126 or something. That they've written formally, it's not coming. So the government says, the new president says, look, we'll find it within our means. Minister, give me proposals, which is the right way to go. So we need to interrogate the idea of reparation and the conversations that would take them, the trade-offs and so on, from not only from the angle of are we playing into the interest of America? If we are playing into the interest of America, then our own people haven't prepared well. So we need to know more about their preparation.
Okay, let me take you back to Mr. Trump. South Africa is calling the bluff of Trump.
Yes.
Straight away.
Everybody calls the bluff of Trump.
But let me just ask a question that I need to be educated on. How did African countries get themselves into this feeding bottle economic government planning that they have to take account of aid in determining what government will provide for its people. Aid from UK, aid from France, aid from Germany, aid from US, aid from Portugal, aid from all over. How did we get, because it is the bureaucrat who says some money could be gotten and somehow we have found themselves budgeting every year, taking account of it.
I think the aid thing depends on challenges countries are facing. Okay, if you take AIDS when it came and so on, it is true that certain countries who had done a lot of tests, the Chinese, the US, and so on, had quite a bit of information, and they wanted to fight it. Trump was in power then, and they had lots of money, and he's giving billions for innovation and so on. When they saw that it's such a calamity, it's going to, but they were ready. They had scientists, they have the equipment, they have the cash, they got the people who do it, and so on and so forth. You can't compare that to Africa. And us not being able to have that, do not have only immediate reasons. I mean, the case is known. Exploitation has been part of the issues. How much of our minerals do they pay for? What is the sale price? Can we? And we borrow, we owe. We need their markets, they need their markets. There is that inequality, okay, that difference in the power structure, not only, I'm not talking about army, in terms of your share of markets, your ability to produce goods with higher value than just raw material and so on. They all form together to show that we are consistently in a much relatively weaker position. Dependence, but dependency is also weakness.
I want to agree with you.
You see?
But assistance is unto winning yourself away from your challenge. But it appears that this assistance has become perpetual.
Well, it is, and that's why we need to work harder to be more self-reliant. It's our market, they colonize us, they still have influence over and across the board. And it is, as is always said, is the unity of Africa, which would stop some of the loopholes that are exploited. Okay, what do we stand for collectively? What are the options? Why would we say, no, if you are not paying this, we are not selling? And how do we have the power to ensure that they do not go to alternative other places where they could get the same thing rather cheaply, and so on and so forth? We are handicapped, and we need to work on those things.
Are we really handicapped? And I want to show you an example.
In given circumstances.
Yes. You see,
because of the different strengths of
different nations.
Of nations and economies and so on.
I also agree.
That's why if AU has conceived.
Can we draw an example from history?
Yes, please.
The OPEC emerged as a bloc to stop exploitation, to stop a buyer's market instead of a seller's market. And OPEC, even though it's weakening today, at a point determined the price of oil in international market.
Yeah.
It paid good dividend to the oil-producing nations. That collectivization was strength. Why is it that Africa is finding it difficult to collectivize, to be able to save itself from this kind of exploitation and develop its own strength to dictate the cost, the price of its raw materials?
As I said, I don't know if it's the right thing to say, like Rome wasn't built in a day. Technology plays a role, and human competences. Okay, there are a considerable number of African citizens and so on who are doing amazing things in Europe, whether it's science, it's economics, it's trade, or what. To what extent have we been able to harness, mobilize and harness or even engage them from where they are for ideas on how they would negotiate for better deals if they were to do that. And you would be told, if you delve into this issue, that the Asians do that. Yes, they bring their brains, whether you're working in America or whatever, there are moments they come together with their governments and they do the analysis and they get to know and they strategize and they work at it. You see, so I think the governance challenge we face is all part of this. Okay, and have we been able to work together as West Africans? Okay, the strength of Nigeria is something that nobody challenges or parallel to in the sub-region. But how does Nigeria, knowing that it's connected, the borders and so on, and those issues are also all there, so what's the strategy Nigeria has adopted? That in forging the strategy, its neighbors, it has engaged its neighbors for historical and contemporary reasons. And they've agreed that, yes, lead us onto this. Do we have the machinery that works that way? Or are we looking at things country by country in a greedy way? Okay, or are we saying, I would like to work with the French, so I'm not going to be part of this. If you take Togo. Togo is a small country, but probably Togo does well with international trade and business. A tiny country with its sea and so on. But ships go there, they trade a lot. And now there are problems with the landlord countries on how to come, Togo is a member of ECOWAS. They're trying to lure Togo and then bring in your goods to Togo or Lomé or something, or if you want to come to Accra, also has complexities because you said you are no longer a member of ECOWAS and so on. You see, so these are things. Now, how do we overcome them? I still think that it is within our purview, it's within our reach if we want to, but we have to work collectively. No one single country can, take on this challenge. And the question is, we must set up machineries. People are trained, expertise. You take long-term, medium to long-term view in resolving issues of global proportions. Okay, are we doing that? So Togo does very well in trade, international trade. Askai, the Ethiopian airline that works in Africa and goes to the east and central or below, Angola and other places, Cameroon and all that. When almost all airlines set up by West African countries, collapsed one after the other, Askai, an Ethiopian airline, comes and is doing business. It's grounded. And it's taken, by the way, I'm boarding Askai back to Accra tomorrow from Lomé. You see, there is Africa World Airlines from Ghana, my country. I'm proud of what a private company is doing, but I can't leave Abuja until in the evening around maybe 8 here, which is 7 in Accra, or 9 here, which is 8 in Accra. I have to stay here all the time. So there are these things. Should we prioritize in fixing these problems collectively so that what we do belongs to everybody? It's Togo that are taking the lead in finding investors and forging good relations with those who are trading in the sea, where there are so many, the shortest route and all that. And yet, that's where pirates are also. But how do we... So the complexity is that each country also has an international partner with some interest in what is...
Would you attribute this splintered approach to also colonial experiences?
It's part of the... It's not just the colonial experience. Of course, Togo speaks French, and we speak English. But, Togo, before the colonial times, if you look at the boundaries and so on, there were Ghanaians and Togolese, and then the split.
Let me look at another dimension to this Trump policy. I'm interested in that. The aid African countries were getting from United States, which Trump now says, let it cease for now.
Yes.
Was government philanthropy, even though nothing is free in international politics. Can private initiatives in Africa begin to work together? Anyhow, I don't know, let's talk about it, to fill the gap that is being created.
Anytime African countries and experts want to work together, it's good for us. However, we also must accept the reality that those interests of trading together also have foreign dimensions. Who invested in their infrastructure for trade? What shares did they have? And what needs to be paid out? And so on and so forth. So maybe we can go back to the past and prove we are not free. Doesn't mean somebody is enslaving us like it did. But it's the fact that there's a conflict of interest. And some are more powerful to offer things that others accept and will not stand together in dealing with what we want to deal with. So we fought, African countries have fought at borders over some oil underneath or something and killed people.
A piece of land.
Yes, over a piece of land. And so it's the complexity, the exploitation machinery as crafted in the past probably has become increasingly sophisticated, but those actors are the same. It might not physically not have been the face of the person who was seen 100 years ago, but the interest and what they could get out of it, which they can't get in their country. If you talk about the DRC, it's a pathetic case. All the countries that had gone there had benefited immensely, and they are still there wanting more, and so on. So integration is important, but we shouldn't talk about it. We should find a strategy for making it happen, for making Africans take control of it. And how do we do that is the question. How do we sustain that is the question.
I'll ask you a question on how we do that by making reference to leadership. Because Trump has come to power and the equation is changing almost all over the world.
Why?
Yes, because he has an idea of his own which is bringing to the table. And he's doing that on behalf of America. By his understanding of the world and the role America ought to play, he's bringing in policies which we're discussing now. Is Africa lacking in the quality of leadership to be able to find that these are challenges that can be resolved only collectively and drive it?
You see, it is always important when we are posing these questions and we're thinking about it, is that we can't undo the damage, okay, that colonization and colonial controls have caused, okay, in Africa and across. They still have vested interest and they are still playing the game. African leaders who emerged to say, look, let's work for ourselves and whatever, it's not always the case they succeeded. So we might not be happy with France, but if you're going to tackle France, then you should also think of what the Togolese government, sees as what is most feasible for its survival. Okay, and the more you've looked at things this way, you find out that these divisions have deep roots. And would we find, who is the African to emerge that could help unify? And that says that in shipping, in trade, and whatever, we are together. Okay, let us do it. Maybe people in Singapore would tell you a different story. Okay, it's now called the city-state. It's not a country. and it keeps developing. And different people find what the land is not so big, just like you would also talk about Malaysia, Singapore, but you could also talk about Hong Kong. Okay, the Chinese are, but it's the Malaysian, the Singapore story that is interesting. Lee Kuan Yew said he was so moved by Nkrumah's ideas and initiatives, he studied Ghana. Even after the coup, said he was coming. Go and see the institutions they built.
Yeah, but Lee Kuan Yew also said that under Nkrumah, he met Ghanaians who came to the university with him, who are reading classics and European history, instead of reading medicine, engineering that Ghana needed to develop. It was a matter of leadership.
It wasn't only a matter of leadership. Okay, Nkrumah was clear. He wanted to be self-reliant. Ghanaian engineers and doctors were going everywhere. There's civil servants that most Ghanaian African countries came from Ghana. And he was giving them up and training more. But the kind of interference external that we had, because he associated in his non-alignment, he felt we can deal with the Russians, we can deal with the Americans. And then the Cold War context, the Americans and the Brits wouldn't accept that, but they were also not so blunt, until they got to a point that they felt, hey, the only way we'll preserve our interests is to do this, and powerlessness and internal divisions, and when they set up. So I believe strongly that sometimes we should study Singapore, because they're split with Malaysia, but there are also determination to assert the autonomy, even as they had smaller land, and use every space into something. How did they do it? The man said he used to come to Ghana. The ideas on the table, the delivery, and so on. But who killed Nkrumah? If I say killed Nkrumah, it was the overthrow, the problems. So the international interest in Ghana, Nkrumah wanted non-alignment, and he has affirmed and assessed it. But there were bigger powers that also had interest in Ghana, and we didn't accept that. In the Cold War context, they could fabricate whatever, and systematically. And internally, you saw those divisions too. So we have to look at our own contribution to that downfall, to that not only we jubilated because Nkrumah was taken out, but if we didn't understand what Nkrumah was doing, and that's why we did that, the question is, how did Singaporeans understand what Lee Kuan Yew was doing, and they supported him and stood against Malaysia or any other countries that threatened them, including India and so on. So I think we have to admit that over time, we probably had the ability to do what Malaysia has done. But the external confrontations, interference, our own coup d'etats that didn't really transform economies and so on. So there's a share of it we should take and say, look, we've caused this mess. Nkrumah had a vision to do it. He tried to unify when he said he thought that these divisions that had occurred, ethnic, religious, whatever, but you also had it as ideological. Those who said, Singapore was able to deal with those very quickly and get a nation around a unified idea, and nobody can infiltrate and do that. But we've always had foreign interests, and from slave trade to now, and even before the slave trade, they have been there. Our historical antecedents differ from them. But if we had united, can you imagine if we had come together as Ghana, clearly understanding our history, agreeing to work together and not letting in the divisions that, came through ourselves because we were divided and so on? Couldn't we have become Singapore? So I think we have to look within and without, but global interest is too strong, and we have opened ourselves to be manipulated and used by powers with diverse interests.
Akwete, you and I are conversing on these things. And leadership is going to benefit from not just these conversations, but the contribution of the intellectual who has the time to analyze, study these things, and make available the implications of actions and situations to the leadership. Is the African intellectual, is the Ghanaian intellectual, is the Nigerian intellectual, considering these things, considering the situation Africa has found itself, and making its contribution to its leadership to be able to get out of it? Or is Africa dead in this mire?
Africa is not there.
Because that's a mire.
No, you see, Singapore didn't set out to build a socialist system, although China is there.
Next door.
Right, next door. But if you look at the dynamics then of Hong Kong, the British controlled it, but China initially was looking inward, its revolutions, and then it decided that, hey, we should trade. But it had trained people, they had certain convergence between leaders, and they had strategy. And their trade turned out well. They got into the global market, and so on and so forth. So a group of people within China, leaders, found a strategy that will counter what was a threat to them. But at the same time, also found a strategy to say, we will pursue this, but we will also engage you constructively. And they were able to do that, and we've seen the difference. Okay, maybe we cannot blame everything on others, and if you're going to blame everything on others, then we are ready.
That's why I'm asking you this question. Our thinkers, what are they doing?
Our thinkers, it's not that we lack them, but we've not been always friendly with thinkers. Okay, yes, and whether it's in Nkrumah's time, whether it's others are more good at exploiting these divisions amongst ourselves, which occurs everywhere. We can't even build consensus on how to strengthen our constitutional. Take local government. Okay, people are saying, hey, it's not going well. The young ones are saying, hey, democracy means nothing, let's get this. And they still simply want to solve their material conditions, improve their living conditions, and so on. So when this has come up, the question that I sometimes ask is that maybe those who colonized us, okay, contributed and, deepen internal division, even though we are together.
Did they also remove our thought?
Pardon?
Did they remove our thought, our capacity to think?
No, they didn't, but it's the way they colonize us and also try to get others on their side and divide. You see, they colonized and they divided atrociously and so on. To what extent was that what happened in other parts of the world, in India and so on? The Indians at some point were able to fight back and to build and rebuild. They are the global tech leaders today in terms of even personnel, those who are leading American things and so on. I think we should look within and see the challenges and what we have caused ourselves and how we can change it. But let us also admit that our country and its resources and so on are known to more powerful agencies who use this. This is the market, they get the cheapest thing, and they are not going to create the space. So it's a question of saying, can Nigeria on its own solve this challenge, its interdependence on this and that and so on? Or when people talk about ECOWAS, what are they aiming at? And how did we try to build that solidarity, that cohesion, and that would help us? It's taken us a long time, seeing that many countries have emerged in these similar situations, and we've been talking about.
Emma, we've been discussing Africa.
So Aluta continue.
I don't want this Aluta to continue because there's another fight about to happen, which I want to draw your attention to. We're talking about reparation. We're talking about a Trump policy. We're talking about no more AIDS and therefore how will Africa. And the last question I asked you was how we get out of this mire. But there is another mire looming, if you don't mind my saying so.
Yes.
Colonial experience and its challenges, slavery and its challenges. Now the new locust in Africa is China. African heads of state are beginning their conference in Addis Ababa Friday, Saturday, in a building, the AU House, built, furnished, and given for free by China. China is now all over Africa giving assistance, giving loans. Will a day not come when you and I will sit down here to talk about reparation from China because of all the harm it has done to our economy and all the exploitation?
China, in spite of its internal differences.
By the way, China is building ECOWAS Secretariat in Abuja.
Okay, China, in spite of its differences, decided to be one nation. And even those days they were discussing it amongst the elites, there were fights. Okay, some reason, some brutally. But China at some point had leaders who emerged and said, guys, let's stop this fighting, this brutality and so on. What brings in money? Markets. Can we deliver manufactured goods and so on that we can sell? Call it capitalism, but is this something that we can do to also get these things and so on? There has been a time that probably they have not shied away from learning from other countries and adopting it to bring change. They have a huge market, even if they don't sell with the world and so on. So you find out that leaders and leaderships are not always ideological. No. There are times they take the step to say, what they're doing is good. Let's find out a bit more. And once we found a bit more, we are confident we have bigger populations and so on. And we can also befriend them, but go through that. I think it calls for some level of sophistication in the strategies we adopt, responsiveness to the changing times, technology and other things that are coming our way, and be able to define our vision, okay, and aspirations within what is increasingly becoming.
But should African nations be wary of China?
Africa is not a monolithic.
Should African countries be wary of China?
I think to the extent that we have not truly prepared ourselves from the understanding we have of China and what it does to engage them in a way that says we are either mutually benefiting or we are not accepting this. Because China clearly has shown there is a lot it needs from Africa. It has a certain dependency on what we have. That's why it's befriending us in various ways and so on and so forth. Have we defined ours? Could that be the basis on which we could say, China, if you will not allow us to do this, given what you want to do here in your country, then let's renegotiate. And has Africa come together to do this? I think we can go on and on. It's leadership and wisdom that has turned China around, because the Cultural Revolution was killing, destroying, retarding their progress. And then they decided that, okay, let's concede. They are leading us, going ahead of us. But why can't we also get into that and play by their own rules so that we have peace and transform our country? At some point, we would have the technology, or ours would be different. And we would have them. You see, they have a certain strong philosophical underpinning that enabled them to work with their enemy without losing.
Why don't we have it?
We have to work at it. We don't have it because everybody would talk to you about, the infiltration. Why could Koreans, and this is something I also felt and learned about Koreans in the 1997 crisis, financial crisis. Initially, the Koreans went to the IMF, World Bank, and what they were to be given and how they would pay it back and so on, they felt this will not work in our best interest. It became a question of what do we do? Okay, how do we change this? The Koreans in the nationalism, love for country, okay, and strong leaders who emerged and said, this is where we're going, and they took them through and so on and so forth. So Korea then appealed to its citizens. The loans interest too high, it's not going to solve the problem. But if only we can all contribute whatever you have, earrings, necklace, whatever, those who have cash and so on, and you can contribute and give us, it will give us enough money to come out of this conditional. And we would use this. That's how Korea got out of it.
Korea got out of it. I did not know whether Africa will ever get out of it. Do you think we can get out of it?
Invariably, all the countries that have broken through have strong leaders. That is the fact. I think ethnicity, I don't know if religion is also doing that, but I think we've been too slow. And we can't blame anybody.
No, I can blame something. Do you think that democracy in Africa will ever allow these strong leaders to emerge?
Of course.
These strong, reasoning leaders to emerge?
Yes. Yes.
You have confidence in democracy?
Yes. I have confidence in democracy that empowers people to choose their leaders. The people who choose their leaders cannot tell our leaders how they should work together or develop technology and have a sense, but the leaders work together. In our case, we exclude. We have very strong penchant for excluding our own selves. Talk to the Indians, in spite of whatever divisions really, and so on, they work together. And you can't touch the scientists. Every protection is given to them. They even have universities for just postgraduate things and so on. And they have a sense of, India is divided. You know, the Muslims and the Sikhs and this and, and Christians and all that. But they have a group that coheres and say India first, China first, and they build. Where's the Ghana first here? Why haven't we built
There shall be a Ghana first.
And where is the Kenyan first?
There shall be a Nigeria first.
And where is the Kenyan first?
That be Kenya first.
And where is the Nigerian first?
We are optimistic.
Look at the Nigerians, the things they are doing in science in the US.
Outside of Nigeria.
So what conditions? I think the success of China, the success of India should also be learned. They studied the systems and said they are different, but they're able to work. So why can't we do that? Why? It is not rocket science. It is leaders sitting down and saying, yes, we may differ and so on. But wouldn't we have a bigger picture and serve everybody's needs, let our differences be manifested? But the basic things, that which gives us dignity and so on, we've been able to achieve that. That conversation must take place.
That conversation must take place, and my producer is giving me a signal that I'm about to bust my limit. And in the past 45 minutes, almost 55 minutes, I've been talking with Emmanuel Akwete. Emmanuel Akwete is a Ghanaian political scientist and governance analyst. Talking Africa, who are we? Where are we headed to? Can we really get out of the mire of the consequences of colonialism? Are we going to face a new low-cost from China? Can we defeat it? Are we prepared? What are our eggheads thinking? What is our leadership doing? When shall we develop trust and confidence in our own competence and compete with the rest of the world? Let me, on your behalf, thank Emmanuel Akwete for coming to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's good morning for this morning. My name is Mwabuze Njoko. Good morning.